Why should Donald Trump be the last president of the United States? It's not because Donald Trump is such an amazing president. In fact, it's because he's a horrible president that he should be the last president of the United States. So, Donald Trump shows the very big flaws in the American political landscape and system, actually. So, if you know anything about American politics, you know that there are three branches of government. And the reason that there are three is because each of them is supposed to perform checks and balances on the other one. So you have the judiciary, which is like the Supreme Court. You have the legislative branch, which is Congress and the Senate. And then you have the president, which is the executive branch. So the idea is that the legislative branch makes legislation, so rules, and the president, so the executive branch, executes the rules, and the judicial branch judges the rules. And that system works sometimes, and it works especially when you have different political parties controlling each of those branches of government. And the judicial branch is always supposed to be neutral and independent. But when you have that branch, which is controlled by one party, and then you have the legislative branch controlled by one party, and you have the executive branch controlled by one party, you have to hope that that one party is trying to direct America in a good way. But in the case of Trump, you can see the very obvious dangers that control of all of these branches leads to. And we can talk about why Trump specifically shows all of these problems, and we'll talk about the solution, I think, to this problem in a moment. But so what about Trump specifically is so problematic? And it's not just Trump. There are other presidents that have shown why having a president is a bad idea for America. Nixon is one of them. And people kind of compare and contrast Nixon to Trump, and they think, oh, Nixon was so quaint. We punished Nixon, and look at what Trump is getting away with. First of all, we don't know if Trump is going to get away with everything. And I have a thought about that in a moment as well. But Nixon kind of did get away with everything because he was caught and he was about to be impeached. So he resigned and then he was pardoned. So he did a criminal thing and he should have been in prison, but he wasn't because of political realities in America. So that was maybe not the first sign that the system was broken, but it was a pretty big symptom. And the presidents that followed, I mean, we could argue if they were good or bad presidents, good or bad people, but they weren't criminals. They weren't corrupt. They weren't showmen and entertainers. So Donald Trump is all of those things. And I honestly believe that he wanted to be president before 2016 because he wanted to sell books. He had a book, he wanted to sell it, and his TV career was coming to an end, so he wanted to have some way of staying relevant. And when he started running as a Republican, he got some traction and he was like, actually, I can win this thing. So he did him, because Donald Trump is so good at marketing. He's really good at marketing, but he's not actually that good at business or governing. Super great at marketing himself. You know, there's a reason that his buildings have Trump Towers and Trump Golf Course and the Trump Burger, Trump Steak, Trump University, whatever, because that's good marketing. It builds his brand. So anyway, as we know, he won the 2016 elections, and the reason he won is a combination of people being really frustrated with the status quo in America and a deeply unpopular candidate that the Democratic establishment chose. Um, no one wanted Hillary Clinton to be president. That's, I mean, some people did, but she lost. She lost the election. So anyway, Donald Trump, he wins the election. And as I said before, he is not very qualified to run businesses, and he's not very qualified to run an entire government. So he tries to run it, and when he was running for election, he did some very questionable things, some illegal things. He committed some felonies, at least 13 that he's been punished for. And we're not going to talk about that particular situation because he was punished for that. But, I mean, he didn't go to jail, which is weird when you do a felony that you don't go to jail. But anyway, there were a lot of other investigations that happened as a result of his first term that, had those investigations been able to come to completion, he he might have ended up in prison. You can think of a lot of them, but one thing is the fact that he took classified documents from the White House and he just left them in Mar-a-Lago in the bathroom when anyone could see them. So that's probably a crime. There was like a bunch of corruption scandals. So I'm sure there were. Oh, of course, he also had an insurrection after his election. And he also called up people because he kind of figured out something about American politics that Americans, they know intellectually, but they don't know deep in their hearts, which is America is not really that democratic. And he heard about this system that the states choose electors, and the electors are the actual ones who choose the president. So he was like, yeah, if we can get electors, then they can choose me and I can still be president. Why did he still want to be president? Because of all of these illegal things that he was doing. So he tried this plot to get some fake electors, which is illegal. He called up different places to get him the votes, which is illegal. And had that investigation been allowed to continue, he probably would have been in prison or at least had a trial. And I don't know, like, people tend not to remember this part of history, which is crazy because it was only like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because of all of the crazy things that Trump has done since then. But there were like legitimately people who were saying that he's going to be in prison before the next election. But his legal team, while not great, was really great at delaying things. And Trump was like, wait a minute, if I'm president, all of these things are going to go away probably. And a thing that people don't remember also is that there was this idea that all of these trials were going to continue when he was president. He would be found guilty. And then there was a question that he would pardon himself because he's the president, so he can do that. So I think that was probably his plan, right? So his plan was like, yeah, I'm going to like drag out these legal proceedings and I'm going to try and be president again because I can do that according to the Constitution. No one says I can't. I'm not actually in jail right now. I can be president again. And weirdly, a lot of felons can't vote in the United States because they have rules like that, but there's no rule that a felon can't be the president. So Donald Trump, a convicted felon, decided that he was going to run for president, and his motivations 100% were to stay out of jail. So he becomes president through a combination of the Democrats and Joe Biden doing a horrible job at preparing for a transition, because Joe Biden also, this is not a thing about Joe Biden, but like, much better president than Donald Trump. But imagine the arrogance that you are so old and you think that you are the only one who can beat Donald Trump, especially when the plan was like, yes, we realize you're old, you're going to step aside, and then we're going to have a leadership contest, and then there's going to be another candidate. Had the Democrats done that, then we might not be in this position. But I think this thing would happen again in the future, because situations like this just need one corrupt guy and his party to be controlling everything. So Donald Trump is like, yeah, I'm going to run. And they did a good job of marketing, because, as I said, Donald Trump is not good at many things, but he is good at marketing. And he put the message out on podcasts that a lot of young people were listening to. And I'm not sure if Kamala Harris would have been invited to those podcasts, but she didn't go. So had she gone, then the people who would be critical for Donald Trump's victory would have heard a different thing. And there was lots of like weird sort of propaganda at the time where, you know, the corporate media elites really bought into the idea that Trump is going to be... It's so loud. I got to close the window. Somebody's... That's not even a parking lot, but somebody has like a... It's like a park, and somebody has a motorcycle in the park. Anyway. So a lot of the media bought into the fact that Donald Trump would be kind of a useful idiot for them, and they would be able to benefit by having him be president. So they really promoted him. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, they thought that Kamala Harris would be much worse than Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump, before now, was considered to be one of the worst presidents in history. And you think that somebody else, anybody else, would be worse? Like, it's like you had a pile of steaming poo in your hand, and you had, I don't know, maybe an apple. Like, I'm not a huge fan of apples. I don't like them as a fruit. But if I had a pile of steaming poo and an apple in my hand, and you told me I have to eat one, I'm going to eat the apple. And a lot of people use that argument about Kamala. Like, they think Kamala would be worse than Donald Trump. Kamala's not a convicted felon, you know? Kamala didn't lead an insurrection. So the levels of propaganda were really, really crazy. And, you know, people said one thing that a lot of people on the right supported Trump for was that he was going to end all wars, right? But he said he was going to be the no war president. But he said in other interviews that he wanted to curtail Iran. So look what happened there. So anyway, as we know, he gets elected in 2024. And I personally was really devastated by that, because that meant, and he won the popular vote. So that meant that Americans looked at the first 4 years of his presidency and said, yeah, we're going to do that again. Kind of brain dead, but, and this also proves my point as why Donald Trump should be the last president of the United States. Because you cannot, and in fact, I saw a bit of research where they figured out that a majority of Americans didn't actually vote for Trump. So there are a lot of people who stayed home in that election because they thought Trump wasn't going to win. So if you took the numbers of people who did not vote, they would have won the election, actually. So that's pretty interesting. So anyway, Donald Trump, he gets elected, and he has two major concerns, right? So the first concern is that he wants to avoid prison. for as long as possible, because that was his main thing about being president the second time. So he stacks the Supreme Court with judges that are favorable for him. He pushes laws that will remove voting rights from people due to that Supreme Court. He, even though there had been bipartisan support for the redistricting to end gerrymandering, he pushed for partisan gerrymandering, which kind of led to an escalation. So Democratic states were doing it because red states were doing it. So he was clearly doing this because he knows that if he loses control of the Senate and if he loses control of the Congress, he could be impeached, right? So as I said, he wants to avoid prison as long as possible. Those choices don't make a lot of sense, actually, if you think about it. Like, why? Because it doesn't make sense for two reasons. The first reason is that Republicans, though they support Donald Trump now, they can turn on him very easily. So the number of Republicans who are 100% loyal to Donald Trump is probably pretty small, actually. I don't know what percentage of the population it is. They're very small, but vocal. So that's why Donald Trump thinks that if he can redo the lines, he's gonna win. But, just because you redo the lines doesn't mean, one, that Republicans are gonna win those districts, because people might change their mind in those districts. Things change, right? Trends change, demographics change, whatever. So unless you are like a Svengali and you know exactly how you can draw the line to remove any possibility of opposition, that's not going to work, right? But he's doing it because of that reason. And so he's doing all of this stuff so he can avoid prison. And the other priority is he wants to have a legacy. And as I said, not a great businessman, not a great politician, but a great marketer. So he comes from the world of real estate. So he thinks, what would be my legacy? Well, I'll build this arch, and people will call it the Trump Arch. And I'll build the east wing of the White House, and they'll call it the Trump Ballroom. But you have to be in control of those projects, because they might, I mean, obviously you need to finish the East Wing, but I imagine the next president is going to destroy that. I imagine the arch is going to be destroyed. And a lot of these things that Trump is doing to kind of cement his legacy are not going to work, because he is a historically unpopular president at the moment. And it's weird, and the wars that he has started are also evidence of that. The fact that he is starving Cuba with horrible sanctions is also evidence of that, because he has seen that there are all of these political problems that America has inherited, and he thinks that his genius can solve them, by kidnapping the leader of Venezuela, and then Venezuela pretending that everything is different because Trump will go on to the next thing, and he did, and then trying to attack Iran so that they can stop their nuclear program, although there was a way to stop the nuclear program that Barack Obama and that administration came up with Iran, and Trump unilaterally in his first term got rid of that because he was so bad and he can negotiate a better deal. So about 10 years later, he hasn't been able to negotiate a better deal. quelle surprise, as they say. So his attempts to secure his legacy are falling apart. His attempts to kind of rig the system even more are falling apart. So I feel that Donald Trump, and this is pure speculation on my part, but I feel that Donald Trump is not going to survive this presidency. Not because of the ridiculous amount of assassination attempts that he has survived so far, and which is really weird. Like, why try to assassinate such an old man? Like, just wait. Just wait. I know he's not the best president, obviously. I wouldn't be talking about him for such a long time if he was a great president, but just wait. Just wait. Time will do the trick. And so I think that he knows, and especially I think that when he sees if the Democrats are able to take control of Congress and the Senate, which is possible, it's not. I don't know. I haven't looked at the odds. I don't know exactly if that's actually going to happen. But if they win the Senate and the Congress, and if their majority is big enough, he could be impeached, like seriously impeached this time. So I think if that happens, or it looks like maybe he won't be impeached, but the moment he leaves office, there's going to be all of these investigations and all of these trials against him. I think that he's just going to fall down the stairs. And it's not going to be that somebody pushes him. He's just going to like, oh, I've had a good run, and tumble down the stairs. That's what I think, because... And I think that Trump really loves chaos. So I can imagine that he would do that at a time when it's not a long enough, like at a time when it's, so maybe the election has happened and maybe there's like, or the election is starting. I imagine that he would do it in October or September, right before the election season really heats up, and he'd fall down, and then J.D. Vance would be the president. So he would just do it so it would be the most chaotic moment possible. So, my thesis, right? I've been talking so much about Trump, but I haven't even got to my thesis. But it was important because I needed to lay out why Donald Trump shows that he should be the last president. Because he appointed the Supreme Court that pretty much rubber stamped any sort of decision that he had, which was kind of stupid, because they are loyal to him and not really to the principles of justice. And he is loyal to himself and his project not to be put in prison. So the Congress, for the most part, although it's starting to look like he might lose that, was pretty loyal to him. It gave him things that he wanted. And obviously he's the president, so he had control of that branch. And I talked about his attempts at a legacy. I talked about his attempts to avoid prison. But there's another thing also that doesn't get talked about. I mean, I guess it does get talked about. But in this context, it kind of shows you why there shouldn't be a presidential system in America. So, the tariffs. Why is it possible that one man is able to unilaterally change the economic policy of a country of 350 million people? That is crazy. Not only one man, but one man that failed multiple businesses, went bankrupt multiple times, and does not have a degree in economics. And when he learned about economics, it was like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So why is he able to declare tariffs on so many people? I know on so many countries, and I know that they declared some of those tariffs illegal, but that took like a year, 2 years, and it has so many effects on the normal population, not only America but the world. And it's weird because there was a free trade agreement with Canada, right? And I read an interview with the American ambassador. And so what happened is a lot of Canadian companies, alcohol companies, they decided that they were, or so in Canada, a lot of alcohol is purchased by government companies because a lot of government companies have monopolies in different provinces. So they purchase a lot of American alcohol, or at least they did. They made the conscious choice not to purchase that alcohol as a result of these tariffs. And Canadians en masse have been boycotting traveling to America. And weirdly, that had an effect on local economies. Like, for example, I guess Las Vegas was very dependent on Canadian travel there. So they lost like 80% of their visitors from up north. And then there's been like these pieces of like, why is Las Vegas so empty? Why is Las Vegas so empty? Maybe because the Canadians are really, really pissed off about that. Anyway, there was this interview with the ambassador to Canada, and he was saying, "Oh, you Canadians are so bad because you won't sell American liquor in your stores." And then the reporter asked, "Well, if we sell American liquor, will you lift the tariffs?" He's like, "No, no, 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 no. You did that as retaliation. We're not going to lift the tariffs. The tariffs are our policies, but you need to negotiate." So it's like, if the tariffs are your policy, how can you negotiate anything? Right? If you think that tariffs are a really good thing, then how can you negotiate? And there was a free trade agreement between Canada and the United States that was signed in 1988. And there was another one that was signed between Canada and Mexico and the United States in 1993, I believe. So for over 30 years, they had free trade, and one guy was able to come along and say, you know what, I think it would be good if we didn't have that. So that's another reason I think the presidential system doesn't work in America. So what is the solution? So this is going to be a crazy idea, and you might say it's not practical, but Americans can do this if they want, but they would need to be like really motivated, really organized, and they need to kind of step out of this like red team, blue team mentality. They need to reform their electoral system. They need to get rid of the position of president entirely, and they need to go to a legislative system, a parliamentary system. And you might think, well, France doesn't have a parliamentary democracy. Not every democracy needs to be parliamentary. Yeah, that's true. Not every I said documentary. Not every democracy needs to have a parliamentary democracy, but in the case of the United States is frozen by this duopoly between the red team and the blue team. And the red team and the blue team cannot possibly represent everyone's interests because political parties, modern political parties, are there to represent people's interests and not necessarily be ideological vehicles. And if you look at what Democrats and Republicans actually do, that's different. I mean, there are some differences, and generally lately with Donald Trump, the Republicans have not been doing great, but it's not that big of a difference, right? So if you had different political parties, you would have different regions being represented, different classes being represented. You would have to come to some sort of consensus And like probably it would be a situation where you need to build a majority because you would have a lot of minority governments. You would have prime ministers rather than presidents. Why is a prime minister better than a president? A prime minister is better than a president because he needs to start, or she needs to start at a local level. He needs to win his riding. He needs to get the support of the local people. And, some parliamentary democracies are not great systems. Like the first past the post system doesn't work really well, but in other countries, like for example Poland, you have like ranked tier voting, and it tends to work really well. So basically, you have a list of people from a party, and you can choose people from the list, and you can choose like your first choice, second choice, whatever, and then they add up all the votes for the first choice, second choice, and then people get into parliament. And that system right there, that very modern, it's not even that modern, but that system of voting would remove the possibility of somebody like Donald Trump being president, because the president has somewhat dictatorial powers until the next election, right? And if he decides, like Donald Trump, that he's all gung-ho for breaking laws because he wants to stay out of prison, then it's really hard to stop him. And you would need really committed people in the American system. And you can tell that you don't have very committed people in different places. So how do you actually get a parliamentary democracy? That's a very good question. I don't know. You don't need a revolution, although Americans are really gearing up for a revolution, I feel, because, like, I think life in America is pretty bad. It's pretty good sometimes, it's pretty bad. But I think what happens is Americans are told this story that America is the best place on earth, like the highest amount of freedom, the best standard of living, whatever. And then they look around and they're like, oh, this is horrible. Or they're like, oh, this is not great. And then they think, oh, the rest of the world must be really horrible. It must be a hellhole. Like if this is the best, then oh my God. But that's neither here nor there. The lack of American education is a different topic. But no, actually, it's connected, because if you had a parliamentary democracy, I think there's a higher chance that politicians would be working towards the things that would actually get them elected locally. So better education opportunities for people, better economic opportunities for people, better healthcare systems for people. Yeah, it would work. So I would say how you get to be a parliamentary democracy, you just need to organize and change your constitution. So just do it. Do it. Just do it. That's my advice to you. So that's why I think Donald Trump should be the last president. Obviously, he's not going to be, and maybe they'll change the system in another 300 years, but I don't think it's working. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section. Bye-bye.